My sister stole over $700,000 from our mother, who suffered from dementia for 2 decades, all while posing as the selfless, devoted caregiver. And she used that stolen money to build her own real estate empire on what can only be called blood money. So I spent months documenting every piece of evidence I could find. And that was 2 years ago. Now she's sending me letters from prison, telling me all about the accounting classes she's taking behind bars, which feels like a dark joke given how carefully she hid her financial crimes. But this whole mess brings me back to a completely different chapter of my life. Back when my husband and I first started dating, because one of his closest friends, a man we all came to call Buttface for good reason, was the first guy in their friend group to get married and have kids. Yet he would still disappear every year with the boys for a week-long camping trip, where he'd hook up with countless women, some of them barely 17, and the entire friend group just looked the other way, convincing themselves his marriage was open because that's what he swore to them, even though his wife stayed home with their young children every single time, which should have raised red flags since. The camping trip was actually very family-friendly, and kids were welcome, but because they were all men, none of them ever bothered to question him about it. And this pattern went on for years before I entered the picture. So by the time I came along, his behavior was treated as completely normal within the circle. I was the very first girlfriend ever invited to join that camping event, and my first year was rocky because Buttface screamed at me when one of his side chicks overheard me casually mentioning his marital status to my husband. And that girl immediately dumped him because he hadn't been honest with her about being married, which made him furious at me. But the real shock came later, when we discovered that his wife had no clue about any open marriage. She was actually 6 months pregnant with their third child at the time, home with their other 2 kids, while he was running around at the campground. And the truth came out when she confronted me in front of everyone after we returned, demanding to know what her husband had done on the trip. And because I knew she was pregnant and he'd been having unprotected sex, I told her the blunt truth, warning her not to let him near her without a condom. And she exploded, making it crystal clear that his so-called open marriage existed only in his head. And from that moment on, I was definitely not Buttface's favorite person. Despite all that, he and his wife somehow patched things up, and he remained an important figure in my husband's life, so we stayed polite at group gatherings. And a few years later, he even became a groomsman in our wedding, though he tried to sabotage things by planning to burn an effigy of me as part of the bachelor party celebrations. And when one of the other groomsmen got horrified and called my husband, it sparked one of the biggest fights we ever had before our wedding. Both of my brothers were invited to that party, and I'd like to think they would have defended me, but I put my foot down and said if that stunt happened, Buttface was out, while my husband countered that if Buttface wasn't in the wedding, there would be no wedding at all. So I shot back that if Buttface pulled that garbage and my husband still backed him, then damn right there'd be no wedding. But thankfully the effigy never materialized and our wedding went ahead, so we let that slide. Buttface later nearly derailed another friend's wedding by pushing for a funeral theme with an actual casket, which the bride found deeply insulting. But eventually my husband and Buttface naturally drifted apart over time, and I was honestly relieved when he stopped coming around. And my husband seemed relieved too, even though he never said it outright. So we settled into a calm, drama-free life and moved forward peacefully. Then, about 10 years after our wedding, my mother passed away after her long, cruel battle with dementia, and she left me her house in her will, which shocked everyone because my sister, Diana, had been her primary caregiver all those years, doing all the heavy lifting while I taught middle school across town. And at the reading, Diana hugged me and said, "Mom probably knew she already had a successful real estate business while I was just a teacher," which stung, but I let it go because we'd always been close, and I didn't want Mom's death to drive us apart. The house sat empty for 6 months while I decided what to do, and eventually my husband Thomas and I chose to renovate and move in. And Diana supported the idea, even recommending contractors from her real estate network, which is how I met Tom, a quiet, knowledgeable contractor who specialized in historic homes. And during demolition, he found a strange bulge behind the kitchen pantry, and when his crew removed the drywall, they uncovered a small old safe embedded in the studs, probably installed when the house was built in the 1960s, and I had no idea it existed. Mom never mentioned it. And Diana had practically lived there during Mom's final years, so surely she would have known. But the safe had a simple combination lock, and after trying birthdays and anniversaries, I remembered Mom always used the same pin for everything, the date she and Dad first met at a college dance. So I spun 041568 and the door swung open, revealing a stack of documents, manila envelopes, and a white envelope with my name in Mom's shaky handwriting. And my stomach dropped because why would this be hidden and why hadn't she told me? I pulled out the letter first, dated 15 years ago, during one of Mom's lucid periods, and she wrote that if I was reading this, then I had found her insurance policy, and she prayed I'd never need to use what was in the safe, but she feared her suspicions were correct, because she loved both daughters equally, but love didn't mean ignoring the truth. And she explained that after her diagnosis, she had noticed money disappearing, accounts she didn't remember closing, signatures that looked like hers but felt wrong. So during a clear moment, she gathered all the evidence and hid it there, and I pulled out the manila envelopes and spread them across the floor. Bank statements, withdrawal slips, power of attorney documents, and a horrifying pattern emerged. Regular withdrawals from accounts I never knew existed, transfers to a business account in Diana's name, forged signatures on document after document, draining a trust fund our grandparents had set up for both of us, worth $500,000 over 20 years, until nearly all of it was gone. And I ran to the bathroom and threw up, because all those years, Diana had complained about the burden of caring for Mom, how it hurt her career, how unfair it was that I got to live my life while she was stuck. And all along, she was stealing our inheritance to fund her real estate empire. Thomas found me hours later still sitting on the bathroom floor, and I showed him everything, and we spent 3 days organizing copies and figuring out the full scope of her betrayal, which was staggering. She'd used the stolen money to buy rental properties, pay for her kids' private school tuition, and build every success she'd ever celebrated on theft from our own mother. And Thomas urged me to confront her right away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, because how do you destroy the person who held your hand at Mom's funeral and called you every Sunday and hosted family dinners where our kids played together? Instead, I drove to Aunt Helen's cottage, and she took one look at my face and said, "You found it?" And she admitted she had suspected for years because Mom had confided in her during a clear moment, but Diana already had control of everything, and Helen didn't dare speak up because who would believe the jealous aunt over the devoted daughter who spent every day caring for their mother? And I left feeling more lost than ever, lying awake at night while Thomas slept, every memory of Diana now tainted, every gift and kindness funded by theft. The next morning, Tom's crew returned to the renovation, but I threw myself into choosing tiles and hardware to distract myself, while the evidence sat locked in our bedroom safe, and Thomas grew frustrated with my inaction, warning that she might still be stealing from other accounts we didn't know about. And he was right, because every day I waited was another day Diana could drain whatever remained of Mom's assets. So I finally forced myself to act and called Diana to meet for lunch at our usual cafe downtown, and she arrived looking perfect in her designer suit. Fresh manicure, the successful real estate agent everyone admired, and my stomach turned as she hugged me and we made small talk about her daughter's college application conditions and the renovation progress, until she casually mentioned needing to access some of Mom's old financial records for tax purposes, and that's when I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Actually, I need to talk to you about Mom's finances." And her smile faltered for just a split second, but she recovered and asked what I meant. So I reached into my purse, pulled out a single bank statement, and laid it on the table between us, and that was the moment everything changed.